Hello everyone and welcome to this audio podcast. This audio podcast is part of the Ghromulin series. This audio podcast is part of a Photon Saga, and this audio podcast is part of a Storm Robotics production. In this audio podcast today, looking at works as part of looking at works from in around 2008 and the role of endogenous opioids in ischaemic preconditioning in humans, and looking at sort of overview of signaling pathways underlying ischaemic preconditioning, the ischaemic preconditioning phenomena, and sort of I look at as sort of a second schematic. A second schematic that sort of that look a second schematic that sort of looks at sort of highlighting and looks at informing of the signaling pathways. Before doing so, however, the schematic was adapted from authors from authors in from authors from authors Hausenloy and Yellon, in around their works from 2008, looking at remote ischemic preconditioning, underlying mechanisms and clinical application. In their publication, additionally in their publication, in the journal Cardiovascular Research from 2008. In Hausenloy and Yellon's publication, they informed that remote ischemic preconditioning, or RIPC, represents a strategy for harnessing the bodies or pathophysiology's endogenous protective capabilities against injury incurred by ischemia and reperfusion. And it describes their publication, and listeners to iterate here, also to iterate and also signpost listeners and viewers to the works of Hausenloy and Yellon, in around sort of some of the initial sort of concepts, the initial concepts or conceptual work in around remote ischemic preconditioning, and to in around a remote ischemic preconditioning, and where the where the publication where the publication informs that the intriguing phenomena is where in which transient non-lethal ischemia and reperfusion of one organ tissue confers resistance to a subsequent episode of lethal ischaemia-reperfusion in a remote tissue, confers in a remote tissue in a remote sorry in a remote remote organ or tissue, and so in Hausenloy and Yellon's publication from 2008, there again in around the schematic, in around a particular schematic. The schematic highlights sort of more in around the concept, and so a look at this a look at this at this at this schematic. So briefly, the schematic is where there are two pathways. There's in around remote ischemic preconditioning. There is neural and humoral pathways. and then within as part of the signaling, there's pharmacological preconditioning, and pharmacological preconditioning, and that pharmacological preconditioning leads into signaling in around ischaemic preconditioning, and when preconditioning occurs as part of the in around the remote ischaemic preconditioning pathway, there are cell surface receptors, cell surface receptors, uh, cell surface receptors that then that then also look at signaling kinases, particularly signaling kinases, and signaling in around the mitochondria. And then, as part of the second pathway, there is remote ischaemic post conditioning. Remote ischaemic post conditioning, there is a neural and humoral pathways, and then additionally there is then a pharmacological post conditioning, and then where pharmacological post conditioning leads into ischaemic post conditioning, where ischaemic post conditioning leads into cell surface receptors also, cell surface receptors, and these cell surface receptors, however, are, for example, adenosine receptors, bradykinin being a vasodilator, allowing the alleviation of blood vessel stress, and thus to increase blood flow, and also sigma opioids as well, and additionally signaling kinases, and to inform the signaling kinases, or signaling as part of the signaling pathway between ischaemic preconditioning and ischaemic post-conditioning. The signaling pathways in around the myocardium are different. Are cells are signaling pathways, so signaling kinases that are different. And again, in the publication by Hasenloy and Yellon, and there is the schematic, which again listeners and viewers are welcome to sort of check out. And in as part of the remote ischemic preconditioning sort of a signaling pathway underlying the ischemic preconditioning phenomena. And at the latter part, there is ischemia, and at the latter part of remote ischemic post and per conditioning, remote ischemic post or per conditioning. At the latter part, there is reperfusion. So again, where there is in around the myocardium, and the signaling in around the pathways, there is ischemia. There's ischemia that takes place. And then there's reperfusion takes place. And again, that where there are signaling, where there are different signaling kinases, signaling kinases that prompt the sort of energy cells in around the myocardium, that is at sort of an underpinning level. That is where the signaling kinases sort of prompt the mitochondria to cause a sense of ischemia, in some aspects, and then reperfusion. And pharmacological agents and pharmacotherapies, for example, in around particular conditions, have been used or utilized to prompt prompt and alleviate the sort of strains of and in around myocardial cells that can become sort of prone to sort of damage in and through particular primary conditions around primary conditions. That draws this audio podcast to a close. This audio podcast is part of a Photon Saga. This audio podcast is part of the Ghromulin series. This audio podcast as part of a Storm Robotics production.